Living Cyber by Joe C. In my journey, online recovery is a story of liberation. Let me use my own example as a story about the profound value that online recovery can bring to life. As you are likely reading this or listening to this online, I suppose I'm preaching to the converted, but still, I have my unique story to tell. As a fellowship, or to be specific, our fellowship's organizational structure, the new frontier of the Internet is viewed as a potential threat to AA unity and longevity. Quote, "A knee-jerk reaction takes 3 years to pass at the General Service Conference," end quote, is an amusing way our delegates and trustees explain the let's not act until we have substantial unanimity approach to democracy. I will make the distinction between our fellowship's general service structure and our fellowship, because while GSO ponders risk and asks, quote, "Should AA's public information messaging be on YouTube or Facebook or Google?" End quote. AA is already there. We, the fellowship, embrace social media. We have acted AA-like online since ICQ and early message boards. The General Service Conference is still hesitating, but you and I are as AA as they are, and we're already on the very internet that they are avoiding on our behalf. It must be frustrating to Public Information's Trustees Committee. We have great videos that explain anonymity, what it's like to be a teenager in AA's position on public controversy, and how we cooperate, not affiliate, with the professional community. These are well-produced public service announcements that aren't being seen. Not much, anyhow. If you navigate AA's bulky AA.org website, you can find them, but they aren't available where millions of people are looking for answers: YouTube, Google+, Twitter, and Facebook. What is GSO waiting for, you ask? What they've always waited for us to tell them what we want and expect. If our GSO seems out of touch or old-fashioned, we need to educate the General Service Conference to the ways AA is carrying the message online. When we want GSO's opinion, we give it to them. That's a simplified version of how an inverted triangle service structure works. GSO serves the members and groups. GSO doesn't vet or oversee us. Does it sound like there's a communication breakdown? It does to me. How did we get here? Just like demographers depict generations and attribute unique characteristics that differentiate the silent generation, born before 1946, from the baby boomers, 1946 through 1964, Gen X, 1965 to 1976, and millennials, 1977 through 1995. I think there are recovery community generations. The formative years for each of our generations leave lasting impressions on us. If you are a baby boomer, your worldview differs from AA millennials born in the 80s. This has influenced everything, from our popular drug of choice to the size and personality of AA when you or I attended our first meetings. I see the 12-step community as having generations too. Instead of differentiating us by our birth dates, I look at the era of our first immersion into 12-step culture. I think it's reasonable to stretch this generational paradigm to say that someone coming into AA in the 1970s formed certain impressions in their formative years, first few years of sobriety. A 1970s newcomer's impression of AA may be very different from the experience of a 1990s newcomers, and those would be different experiences from those of us who came here for the first time since 2010. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, but for the purposes of our discussion about technology and online recovery, I think there are too many old-timers at the bottom of our inverted triangle planning AA for the next generation of newcomers. We need a bold, culturally diverse, and tech-savvy stewardship to take the reins. Imagine the advice from a sponsor who sobered up in 1985 compared to someone who got clean and sober in 2015. If you're from the 80s, you might say, sure, spend some time on 12-step Facebook groups, but there are no replacement for face-to-face meetings. Your computer or smartphone won't keep you sober. However, if your sponsor got sober in 2010, she's a native versus an adapter to the online recovery community. The class of 2010 sponsor might have done her own research about alcoholism online, answered the 20 questions online, poked around AA online communities under an alias, and watched YouTube videos about AA before she ever went to her first meeting. Based on personal experience, the millennial sponsor always had an AA that was online. Your 1980 sponsor never visited an online recovery community until they were over 20 years sober. Each will have biases informed by their formative and early recovery experience. My story. My recovery was changed by access to an online AA community. No one was concerned about anonymity at the level of YouTube in 1976, or 1986, or 1996. Even in big city AA is a small town. Everyone knows everyone in a short time. Our annual local conferences are like county fairs. You're going to see everyone there, every year. I grew up in AA without the secular AA group option. I was not an oddball, but I found myself as a minority. Montreal was my home. I moved to Calgary with less than 2 years of sobriety, 1979, and later settled in Toronto, 1985, going on 10 years of sobriety. I traveled, so I got to AA meetings in different countries and in different towns and cities. Everywhere was the same. Most people believed in sobriety-granting, prayer-answering, parking spot finding, higher powers. I felt welcome, but different. I wondered if my sobriety and welcome were on shaky grounds because I didn't act and believe like everyone else. I faced a double stigma, as I was a visible minority too. I was a teenager. Some wondered, and they weren't good at hiding it, if I was a real alcoholic. The favorite one-liner was, "Kid, I spilled more booze on my tie than you ever drank." While I couldn't hide my age, I wasn't outspoken about never experiencing the hand of God. In a way, it was like being gay, LGBTQ back then. No one asked, and no one told. Who cares what each other believed? I admired the unabashed who quip, "I stay sober without God the same way you do, because there is none." I wasn't so confident. I was always ambivalent about the soundness and security of my position in AA because of being both young and non-theistic. Online recovery was the most liberating experience for me in AA since the feeling of not wanting to drink every day. Online, in early 2000s, I found my people. Back then, it was ICQ groups and message boards. It barely exists anymore, but in 2005, I found the Yahoo groups, AAWR, AA with no religion. In October 2005, there were 1,650 posts from sober non-believers finding other sober non-believers. It was one of the pioneering secular communities. I found AA Free Thinkers groups from AAWR. By 2007, MySpace started taking over, then Facebook, and by 2013, monthly posts of AAWR fell to single-digit numbers, including how to unsubscribe. AAWR members weren't getting drunk, They were simply migrating to new platforms. But AAWR changed my life. It was affirming to know that I was no longer alone. My secular sobriety was not second class or on shaky ground. I couldn't have known that, not without having a broader relationship with like-minded AA members than any face-to-face AA gathering had provided. I found a community that I bonded with. I found out about the New York AA Worldwide Directory of Agnostic AA meetings, and I planned to attend one. At my first agnostic meeting in New York City, I thought, Toronto is going to love this. I was partly correct about that, as history would later reveal. I also found AA History Lovers, where I could read posts from the likes of Ernie Kurtz, Mel B., author of Pass It On, Glenn Chestnut, and other history buffs. In more ways than one, my 12-step world was expanding. I also fell into what would be more like a millennial newcomer's experience. I was struggling with addiction again, process addiction. I don't know how many 12-step and other mutual aid meetings I've been to. Sometimes I've been there to support others, but there are several groups to which I call myself a member. Adult Children of Alcoholics in the 1990s showed me that there was more to emotional sobriety than looking after my side of the street. Neglect and abuse had a role to play in my beliefs and behaviors. This led to professional help with grief and the exploration of early childhood trauma that I had glossed over in my early AA inventorying. I've been a periodic attendee at NA meetings, where I'm constantly reminded that more has been revealed. NA's literature is mostly from the 80s, and in the case of Living Clean, 2012. The magic isn't only found in 80-year-old books. In my 30s, sober but still unmanageable, a well-meaning AA friend invited me to a Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meeting. By the age of 32, I had 2 failed boy meets girl on AA campus relationships, 2 children from 2 hostile exes, and my life didn't feel or look like what a 15-plus years sobriety power of example life should look like. I had relationship and impulse control problems. I learned why from SLAA, but I thought I wasn't that bad really. More like a victim of a series of bad breaks and serious misunderstandings. I didn't stick around. By 2004, my life was more unmanageable. I was now HIV positive, and one of my children had been abducted by her mother, who was now wanted by the police. The rest of my family was suffering the loss of our daughter, sister, niece, granddaughter, cousin. I felt responsible and ashamed. In a way, I was a millennial newcomer, coming back to SLAA for my relationship and boundary issues, and going to therapy for my shock/trauma and depression. I was sober, but barely holding on emotionally. I used the internet. My new secular online 12-step community helped me to get more rigorously honest about not fitting the God could and would if he were sought model of the 12-step paradigm. I revisited the 12 steps in a more authentic way. I didn't skip words. I replaced them with what was true for me. It felt vulnerable to come out in the rooms. This is my own anecdotal observation, but I remember the 1970s AA environment as not caring exactly what I believed, so I didn't care that much about it either. But in the 21st century, the room seemed more polarized, the right way and the wrong way. I had to be honest, and it felt risky. Would I be accepted exactly as I am? 2 faulty core beliefs I've always struggled with are, A, if you really get to know me, you will reject me, and B, There will never be enough money, love, time, security, strength. I was depending on the fellowship, face-to-face and online, and you were there when I needed you. I find the most antisocial, hostile, and humorless AA members online. I also find the most sincere, vulnerable, and accessible AA members online. Like face-to-face meetings, if you haven't found an online group you don't like, you haven't been to enough online groups yet. But you can find your people online. I did. Just keep looking. Your niche is already meeting online somewhere. The internet wasn't only changing my recovery. The music business was transformed. Publishing, sex, entertainment, business, and dating were transformed. Everything changed. I was already podcasting my radio show. www.indieCam.com, spelled INDIECAN. The first show was 495 episodes ago, at the time of writing. That steered me to the first Podcasters Across Borders, an international gathering of indie broadcasters/podcasters who hosted shows about hip-hop, parenting, Marilyn Monroe, motorcycle fan clubs, and new technology. In the early days, 2004 to 2008, most podcasts were about podcasting. I remember finding addiction/recovery podcasters. Many of the earliest finds don't exist anymore. There was a guy named Paul G. from Thailand who offered periodic insights about life and struggles in recovery from addiction. There was the Monty Man from Take 12 Radio, a lover of all things Big Book. And there was Recovery 101, a meeting after the meeting, with Shelley, Mark, and Bruce, each week from Southern California. Today we find everything from magazine-style shows, audio memoirs, interviews with authors or celebrities, and niche shows, women's shows, recovery news, atheists, agnostics, and addiction-specific shows, weed, porn, sugar, heroin, consumer debt, the science of addiction, or even technology addiction. Some shows last, and some fade. Here's a case study of a great show that once was www.cleanradio.com. That's clean with a K. It started broadcasting live on the radio, and then videocasting on YouTube. They interviewed experts and celebs from their studio in Burbank, California. They landed TV personality Pat O'Brien, recipient of the Experience, Strength, and Hope Award in February 2017, the one-time sports commentator who, in sobriety, authored I'll Be Back Right After This, my memoir. Clean Radio was syndicated, had high production value, and now they are, we don't know. They just fell off the radar in the fall of 2015. There was no explanation for how they went from being the next big thing to off air. Here are some of my favorites, which are in no way intended to be construed as a best-of list. They're just podcasts that I am a regular listener of. Since Right Now Brobriety with Jeff, Matt, and Chris, and sometimes guest hosts. After Party Pod with Anna David, former editor of TheFix.com and award-winning author. After Party Pod was a spin-off from the online After Party magazine, which includes addiction recovery regulars such as Tracy Shabala, Danielle Stewart, and more. What the Fuck, WTF, with Mark Maron. He's not doing a show about addiction, but it comes up a lot. Real Sobriety, recovery in 5 minutes or less. Robert, how do you do that? I so admire brevity. I can't get to the point in the first 5 minutes. Talk Recovery Radio from Vancouver with Giuseppe, Francis, and Darren. Sober Courage with Mag Shores, a diary of sickness, family struggles, and real-life recovery. And In Recovery Radio, an offshoot of In Recovery Magazine, and new to the game. Of course, I've never missed an episode of the AA Beyond Belief podcast, and so long as I have my hearing, I never will. There are others that have been great. The Bubble Hour, Share Podcast, non-recovery podcasts too, like The Thinking Atheist, The Friendly Atheist, and don't get me started on indie music. I have 10 favorite music shows too. Again, this isn't a best of, but rather my regular haunts online. There are plenty more I get to when I can. Life/recovery balance is an issue too. Having a healthy relationship with technology, including the internet, is one of sobriety's balancing acts that requires self-monitoring. Me? Moderate? Well, that's the idea anyway. How relevant is the internet as a medium for reaching the still suffering addict alcoholic? In Austin, at our 2016 International Conference of Secular AA, then known as WAFTIAC, I hosted a panel called Living Cyber. It featured people who credit the online community for their inspiration to stay sober and carry the message. So, online recovery isn't a second-rate substitute. Think of the shift workers, single parents, people with disabilities, and people with social anxiety disorder or other mental health issues that make public gatherings a barrier to recovery. Well, it's not a barrier anymore. Since Right Now, who participated in the panel, simulcast the meeting on their website and then posted it for streaming for interested visitors. In 2 days, over 2,400 people had seen a secular AA meeting. That's 6 times the registered attendees for Austin's November 2016 gathering. Online recovery matters. It's accessible, it's effective, it's one of several ways we fulfill our purpose as a movement by removing barriers and building bridges. AA is concerned about where's the growth in membership. Maybe it's happening and we don't know how to record it. I think it's urgent to learn how to record the numbers of online recovery participants in an anonymous way, of course. It could be that AA is growing, but we're just not going to face-to-face meetings where AA membership is recorded. Will online meetings be the norm in another 20 years? I don't know. Could be. Let's make room for this possibility. More of our gathering ought to be available online in a way that is mindful of our traditions. What's our declaration? Anyone? Anywhere? Well, if our anyone, anywhere efforts aren't online, I don't know where we ought to be extending the hand of AA. About the author, Joe C. Joe C. got sober 40-plus years ago in Montreal, Canada, at the age of 16. Rebellion Dogs Publishing released Joe's Beyond Belief Agnostic Musings for 12-Step Life, the first secular daily reflection book for addicts and alcoholics. Joe is a regular columnist focusing on music, finance, billiards, and addiction recovery lifestyle. Joe also hosts Indie Can Radio and Rebellion Dogs Radio. Sometimes Joe facilitates workshops for behavioral health professionals and sometimes for members of the recovery community. You can find Joe on Facebook or www.rebelliondogspublishing.com. The original print version of this story, Living Cyber by Joe C., can be found on the website aabeyondbelief.com in the language of Recovery section dated February 5th, 2017. For more stories, articles, and podcasts, please visit our YouTube or SoundCloud channels. Just search for AA